Welcome to this week's episode of Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. I'm Robert Gilliland.
And I'm Mike Alexander.
Thank you very much for joining us. You know, Mike, I've had a lot of conversation with clients around two things, and I thought it would make a lot of sense for us to maybe this week spend our time on this podcast talking about things you should know and strategies if you want to get a second home or thinking about retiring someplace else. I mean, it's everyone's dream.
Interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
where rates are.
I mean, whether it's abroad, whether it is get a second home on the beach or in the mountains, some of the things that people should be thinking about when it comes to, do I really want to have that second home? And I'll kind of kick it off and let you kind of build on it from here. Is that a lot of times when clients come to me and say, hey, I think I want to buy this bay house, or I want to buy this lake house, or I want to do this, I always tell them to make sure before they make that investment, that's what they really want to do. And this includes when you're going and thinking about retirement. Hey, when I retire, I want to move to X, right? Whether it's the hill country or here in Texas or Colorado, or I want to do this. And what I tell people is, before you go and do any of that, go and spend the next year going there on a regular basis and spend time. And so if you're going to, and a real life example is a client who said, well, when I retire, I want to move to Nebraska. And I said, awesome. That he was originally from Nebraska. I said, what I want you to do is I want you to spend the next year going to Nebraska and spending an extended period of time in the town and the place where you want to go. He's like, oh, I don't need to do that. I know that's where I want to go. He sold his house here in Houston, moved to Nebraska. 6 months later, March, he calls and he says, I need to buy a new house. I'm like, really? Why is that? I'm coming back to Houston. It is too cold here, because he was there during the wintertime. He was bored, too cold, too much stuff to do, had to come back. So I tell people, if you want to move someplace, go and visit and make sure that's what you want to do. I don't know if you've had any different type of experiences or any sort of conversations along those lines.
Yeah, I think more of the conversations I've had have been around the second home aspect of it, but I think your point is spot on as it relates to spending some time there. I don't think it's necessarily bad advice to say, maybe what you want to do is you want to rent a house for 6 months, maybe even a year somewhere before making a decision to actually move there, especially when you think about the cost associated with selling a house and moving and that entire process. And maybe you want to experience all four seasons there to your point, Robert, and make sure that, this is great in the spring and summertime, but maybe I get there in the winter and find out it's not quite as enticing anymore.
The other thing, and we'll get into this in just a second, is that a lot of people are saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy a house in the mountains of Colorado or along the coast in Florida or Alabama or something like that. And they say, well, I'm just going to go and rent it out. Well, there's a lot, it's not as easy as that. And it's not a straight cash flow type scenario that's inside there. But let's assume that you are, you know what? I found this house. I want to buy it. It's going to be a second home. What are some things people need to be thinking about buying this second home? It's just going to be a second home, whether it's a lake or on the beach or in the mountains.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, you obviously have to think about taxes and maintenance and the ongoing upkeep of a second residence. For a lot of folks, that means that they have to have, perhaps a property manager or somebody that's there locally. Do they have people that they can count on to actually help maintain the property, or do they want to maintain it themselves? One of the things obviously is it comes to that, to owning a home somewhere else is, is perhaps you're getting a little bit older and, do I really have, do I have the energy and the desire to actually maintain that? And maybe I have the financial resources to pay somebody else to do it, but it's certainly worth examination.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So if you are, there's this whole migration, right, of people moving from the city out to the country, whether it's second homes or whatever. The reality is that if you're going to go move out to the country in retirement, you really have to think about, where's the grocery store? What about medical, right? So maybe that moving to another place out into the country, because you don't see many people who live in the country, they turn around, retire, and decide to move into the city. Right? Yeah, I want congestion and I want traffic and everything else that comes with living in the city. But moving out, there's some things you have to think about, because I can use this as a real life example. I had some clients that lived here in Houston, and when they retired, they moved to Brenham. Now, Brenham's much bigger now than when they moved out, but that was a much slower pace of life, which sounds great to a lot of people, but it's still 30 minutes at that where they lived. It was still 30 minutes to the closest grocery store. Right. And medical attention wasn't necessarily, to get their doctors and everything were not necessarily as easy to access when they lived out there. If you're thinking about buying that second home, what are some strategies for financing it that you kind of go through and kind of come top of mind, or some things that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about purchasing that home?
Yeah, I think it's a good question in this environment, Robert, in that we're in an environment where if a person is going to finance it, just recognize that interest rates are significantly higher. You're talking about, a mortgage that's in the 7 to 8% range. And so, thinking about how they want to finance it, it may actually have some impact on the budget that they actually have set aside for doing so. Recognize also that if you're having work done on a second home, it's likely to be a little bit more difficult to find somebody to do it. And the materials and costs associated with it are likely to be a little bit higher as well. And so I think from a financial perspective, if, as we always like to say, if money is an object, you definitely want to make sure that some of those things are factored into the decision. One other thing, and maybe it's not maybe not related to the financial part of it, Robert, is if it's a second home, is it close enough to where you're going to be there on a regular basis? I think there used to always be a kind of this rule of thumb that if it wasn't, if it was anything greater than 3 hours, the odds of you getting there as a second residence were probably going to be a bit more limited. And whether that's a drive or a flight, I would leave it to other people, the owner to decide, if you will, but just things that, perhaps to think about as it relates to, going through the cost of financing and maintaining a property like that. Well,
if you're going to own that second home and it's longer than 3 hours away, and I would argue that if you're getting on an airplane, you're starting with it being more than 3 hours away, right? Because you've got drive time to the airport, wait in the airport, get on the plane, and the additional cost that's involved with that. But the thing that makes the most sense is when you actually own it, it's very easy to say, oh, I'll just go next weekend. Oh, I'll just go next weekend. And then the next weekend rolls around. Oh, I'll just go the next weekend. That's why if you're going to own a second home and you're thinking about this, that's the reason why I say it makes sense to go and rent something at least every single month for a full year. That way it's not optional to when you go, because even though you're paying a mortgage, you're paying a mortgage, you still go, because if you have reservations someplace, it's not like you're just going to say, oh, we just won't go, and see how much you really like it, or if it becomes a chore for visiting that. One thing also that I think you have to think about is you have to go and look in your financial plan. How does cash flow get affected by you having this second place, right? Because some people, when they're thinking about retirement, still want to go on vacations and have a second home. Well, is that going to put too much of a drain having these couple extra $1,000 a month in expense on that for a piece of property inside there? Any thoughts around when people go and say, well, I'm just going to rent it out. I'm just going to put it on Airbnb and go out, other than inside of there, some other things that you need to kind of think about?
Well, I think if you're just going to rent it out, certainly, the location of that property makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's going to be a big factor in whether or not it's going to be rented a lot, and also how many rentals are in that area that people could be renting otherwise. It's very, very difficult to be able to count on that. The second thing is, and this I think happens a lot with like beach and lake properties, is all of the times that you would be able to rent it out easily are the times that you actually want to be there. Now, I think there's always a silver lining in ownership, and that is, we're here in Texas, and as an example is, you can pick and choose and say, you know what, the weather's really nice this weekend. I think we'll head down, we'll head out to the lake, or we'll head down to the beach. And if the weather's not good, then you don't have to. Obviously, the person who's renting a property doesn't always have that luxury. They're kind of, held hostage, if you will, because they've already booked in advance. And so I think those are things that you really want to think about, as it relates to these second properties.
I think also something else is that sometimes when people go through and on paper go to think about the cash flow from renting out these properties, that's not exactly what ends up happening, because the ice maker goes out or the air conditioning goes out, and they're not straight mailbox money cash flow machines. A lot of people, they'll go through periods where it's rented out a lot, but they still have to make up for those periods when it's not rented out. That lake house probably isn't being rented out from Labor Day till middle of March. No one wants to be on a lake in February, right? It is just not a pleasant time to be. And so you have to be prepared to make up. And then when you go through periods where you have a tighter economy, where people are not, renting Airbnbs or renting homes for vacation, and they're actually staying at home and not doing that, you may not have it rented all the time. You have to factor in, like what you said, the management costs, the repair, the maintenance, and make sure that it's not just a cash flow machine that's inside there. The other thing that I think that's vitally important, a lot of times people view real estate as investments, and in its truest sense of the nature, it is. But there are tax implications that come along with that. If you're renting your place out, odds are you're going to be depreciating it. So while you own it, you get these massive tax deductions and tax benefits, right? But when you go to sell it, you either have to buy another piece of real estate, do the 1031 exchange, or there's some other vehicles that you can go and use, or you're going to have to pay capital gains tax on that amount from that depreciated down amount. And I've got a lot of people who have real estate like that who are like, yeah, I really want to sell, but I don't want to pay the taxes. Well, we don't really have many choices here. We're either going to have to pay taxes, or we're going to have to continue owning this piece of property.
Yeah, I think that the other, to your point as well, you got to factor in things like property taxes and insurance, and those, are also, part of the cost of ownership, if you will. And it can be very difficult to recoup some of those things. I think at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of, is this something that I would really enjoy doing? And I think, that's the whole thing of, in terms of the people that we do planning for, is this something that you would really enjoy? And if so, then let's plan for that. And let's plan on you enjoying it, but let's make sure that we go in as educated as we possibly can be in terms of making sure that it works out, not only personally, but also financially as well.
I think that's a great place for us to stop and just kind of hit those high points. first and foremost, if you're thinking about buying a second home or thinking about retiring to a new place, make sure you test it out. Make sure you go and you understand what you're getting into. It's the type of lifestyle, the type of environment, the people are what you connect and associate with. You understand that when you own it, you need to use it. Don't go into it if you think that you're going to lease it out or rent it or whatever, that it's all of a sudden going to be 100% free cash flow. That's not necessarily going to happen. Make sure you understand the tax implications, the cash flow implications, and quite honestly, if it fits within your financial plan and you're able to live the life that you want to live, by all means, let's figure out a strategy how to make it happen. Be aware of where mortgage rates are and the requirements for down payments. It probably doesn't make sense to empty out your 401k to buy a second home. Tax implications are too great. But owning a second home can have a ton of advantages, but making sure you know exactly what you're getting into is what makes the most sense. And so with that, I want to say thank you for joining us this week on Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. I'm Robert Gilliland, and we'll see you next week.
See you next time.